Hello and welcome to News Central TV. I'm Darshan Usman. Here are stories making headlines beyond the continent. We begin the news with U.S. election, where swing states are at the heart of the election, where both major political parties are vying for crucial votes. The U.S. presidential election outcome is likely to come down to voters in 7 key battleground states based on assessments from independent polling experts. Now, this year's swing states are Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. With its 19 electoral votes, Pennsylvania is the largest prize among the battleground states and an important piece of both campaigns' path to victory. Now, both Kamala Harris, Donald Trump, and their running mates have made frequent visits to the state since becoming their party's nominees, including events in Allentown, Scranton, State College, Harrisburg, and others in the final week of October. Now, polling stations have opened in the highly anticipated U.S. presidential election, with Kamala Harris and Donald Trump neck to neck in the polls. This historic election could make Harris the first female president, while a Trump win would mark a remarkable comeback. The outcome is far from certain, with millions of voters expected to cast their ballots today. The results may take several days to finalize, adding to the tension in this deeply divided nation. Now, the world watches anxiously, knowing the outcome will have far-reaching implications for global conflicts, climate change, and more. Election day voting began on Tuesday after an extraordinary and unnerving U.S. presidential race that will either make Kamala Harris the first woman president in the country's history or hand Donald Trump a comeback that sends shockwaves around the world. Republican former President Trump, 78 years old, and 60-year-old Democratic Vice President Harris were tied in the most competitive and tense White House race in modern history as the first voting places opened. Now, the rivals spent their final day of the campaign frenetically working to get their supporters out to the polls and trying to win over any last undecided voters in the swing states expected to decide the outcome. A recent Ledger poll published by the New York Post reveals that U.S. Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump and Democratic candidate Kamala Harris are locked in a close race ahead of Tuesday's election, with each securing 49% support. Now, only 2% of respondents indicated they would vote for another candidate. Both Trump and Harris are viewed as equally capable of enhancing Americans' quality of life, each receiving a 44% approval rating. However, Trump leads Harris in terms of the clarity of his economic strategy, with 45% support compared to Harris's 42%. Now, the poll, conducted between 31st October and 3rd November among 950 likely voters, has a margin of error of 3 points. The New York Post, owned by Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation, endorsed Trump for president in late October. To discuss this further, we're joined by our international correspondent, Afia Hagen, who is in Washington, D.C., and a political analyst, Center for Research on the Congo-Kinshasa Kambale. I'm talking about Kambale Musevuli in Accra, Ghana. Thank you so much for joining us. All right, now let's start with Afia. Afia, can you go ahead and tell us how important or how significant, are swing states in the presidential election?
Well, swing states are hugely important in this particular presidential election because they can swing either way. They can go to Democrat or Republican. Now, Pennsylvania is probably the most important swing state. It has 19 electoral college votes, and it's almost impossible to win the presidency without those votes. It's well on the path to victory. So they are hugely, hugely important. Now, I'm still here in downtown Washington, D.C. at the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Library, where all day we have seen people queuing up, and some for 45 minutes or more to cast their votes. And I'm actually here with a voter now. This is Matthew. Matthew, thank you so much for talking to us here on News Central. How did you cast your vote?
I voted for Jill Stein from the Green Party for president.
Tell me about why you voted for an independent third candidate, essentially.
It's a protest vote. Jill Stein is not going to be president, but over the past year and a couple months, the Biden-Harris administration has provided the weapons, the funding, the diplomatic support, and much of the propaganda for an Israeli genocide in Gaza, which has now expanded into a wholesale destruction of Lebanon. And I think it's important that the Democrats cannot get the message that they can just rely on people to vote for them purely out of fear against Trump. That shows them that they can do anything. So in protest against the genocide in Gaza, I voted for Jill Stein because she supports an arms embargo against Israel, which would put an end to the genocide.
Do you think the war in Israel-Gaza is going to be an issue that voters are really going to be affected by when they're at the ballot box?
I think a lot of voters will be. Most Americans traditionally do not vote based on foreign policy, but we have such a weird election system here that small groups of voters in key areas can be crucial. So the big one relating to this issue would be Arab Americans in the state of Michigan, which is one of the swing states that you were mentioning. If Arab Americans do not come out and support Kamala Harris, there's some chance that that could make the difference. I don't know if the election will be decided based on the issue of Gaza, which we see not as a war but as a genocide. But for us, that's what we're voting based on. And I care about lots of issues as well, and I think, frankly, Jill Stein, the policies that she proposes would be better than the ones that Kamala Harris proposes on the economy and all sorts of issues.
Now, I know you didn't vote for the two main candidates, but which of them do you think will win this particular election?
I have no idea. The polls have been tied, and I would just completely be guessing if I were to make a prediction.
Matthew, thank you very much for your time. And really interesting to hear from someone there who has decided not to vote for Trump, not to vote for Harris, and going for an independent third candidate. And because of the war in Israel-Gaza, something that could be a really big sticking point, particularly for the Democrats and for Kamala Harris. You know, that Arab American vote in Michigan, the Democrats have had for a long time, and it's seen that they have actually long taken that for granted. And a lot of Arab Americans in Michigan particularly potentially making a protest vote and not voting for Democrats or Republicans because of issues in Israel-Gaza.
Quite interesting indeed, Afia. Now let's move to Musavuli. Musavuli, now still speaking on the importance of these swing states. Now, what demographic changes are taking place in these important states right now, and how do you think they will affect 2024 voting trends?
Palestine, as mentioned by the person interviewed, I think his name is Matthew, is actually one of the key factors that's going to decide the election. The young generation in the United States, the millennial, including the Z generation, are very keen to change the conditions in the countries, in the United States, particularly with the situation in Palestine. They are watching live a genocide, questioning who are the leaders that they have who are condoning what is actually happening. So this is why I believe that the question of genocide in Palestine is key. And young people in the United States are determined to hold their leaders accountable for what is happening. But another thing to also remember, even though we are talking mostly about Trump and Harris, is that the United States has 6 presidential candidates right now. Right, Matthew mentioned Jill Stein. You have 6, right? In the 6, 3 of them have a particular policy that for us on the African continent we should pay attention. One policy that I see is the defunding of the U.S. military. The U.S. military has been very engaged on the African continent. In some parts of the African continent, they're even training militaries who send their soldiers for protests. Mostly to subjugate the citizens to violence. So for us on the African continent, we have to look at that. How come in the public narrative of the elections, we only hear Harris and Trump? The polls are saying it's close to 49% for each one of them. But many people in the United States right now will be doing protest votes to change the status quo of a duopoly of Democrats and Republicans. And that's why I think that this election is historic. We do have a Democratic candidate who's a woman, but we also have independent candidates who are women. Jill Stein and Ella Cruz are independent women as well, who are away from the mainstream politics.
All right. Now, coming back to you, Afia, how important is it for people to vote in these swing states? We know the demographic, we're talking about young people, minorities, suburban women, and all that. Are they all expected to influence that turnout?
Extremely important for anyone everywhere to vote. Your vote is your voice. But when we talk about the swing states, absolutely it is. Those are the states that have the most electoral college votes, and those are the ones that can make up that 270, that magic number that you need to win the election and take you on that path to victory. Pennsylvania is one that is mentioned a lot because it has the most amount of electoral college votes, number 19. But Michigan, like we've just been talking about, is hugely important as well because of that Arab American vote. And if you do have a protest vote in that state, it could swing it Republican or it could swing it for the Democrat. So across all these swing states, across all the states, but particularly swing states, it is very, very, very important to get out the vote. And that's why we will have seen candidates really crisscrossing those 7 states the last couple of weeks of the election because they are the most important.
Now, over to you, Mr. Vuli. To what extent do absentee ballots and early voting contribute to, the outcome in swing states?
Right. I am in Ghana. I'm voting in the U.S. election as I have a U.S. citizenship. And my U.S. residency is North Carolina. North Carolina is a swing state. Beyond presidential, I'm also worrying about the governor, or governorship, the governor's race, where we have a candidate who's a self-proclaimed black Nazi, right? So for anyone in North Carolina, beyond just the presidential elections, we are also looking at the local elections and how it's going to actually shape the state of North Carolina. So these swing states are important. The going to vote is important. And as I mentioned a moment ago, the discussion around the Electoral College is critical because the Electoral College is supposed to vote at least based on the will of the people who are voting. But the local and governor election in North Carolina, in the swing state, are equally important because local politics is also what affects American citizens, wherever they are, beyond also what will happen at the presidential level.
All right, now, Afia, if you can hear me now, you are a correspondent, covering the election. How are social media and media coverage impacting, or how is social media and media coverage impacting public opinion, especially among voters, who are still unsure?
When it comes to social media, social media has played a really, really huge part in this election, probably more so than ever before. We have the advent of AI in this election. Donald Trump has his own social media network, Truth Social. So things have really evolved even from 4 years ago. Elon Musk now owns X, before it was called Twitter. And he has taken away a lot of the controls that try to tamper down on AI, on fake news, on false information. So a lot of that is running rampant. And that really does influence what people look at, what people see, what they take to be as true and as not. And so you have a lot of debunking going on. But the problem is that sometimes when you have these rumors or these stories already out on social media, people will grab onto them. They get retweeted or reshared or reposted millions of times. And by that time, the jack is out of the box and it is too late. So social media plays a huge part in this election, and as does the media generally, whether that's the mainstream media, whether that's podcasting. People get their news from all sorts of different places, and that will influence what they think about the candidates, who they want to vote for, and even if they will come out to vote. We've been talking about polls for weeks now, and if people think the polls are not that close, perhaps they won't vote. This race has been tight from the very beginning, so people perhaps feel more like my vote will count, so I have to get out there. So absolutely, social media and the media at large play such a huge part in any election. And as it's evolved, like I said, with AI, with the different kind of social media networks you have now, things have certainly changed. The landscape has changed.
All right, now just before we wrap up, to you, Mr. Vuli, to what extent have recent state-level voting laws and regulations, such as restrictive mail, in voting and other voter ID requirements, how have they impacted results in these swing states?
A little bit much different in different states, especially in the South, being Georgia. Some of the policies are affecting voters. For the case of even North Carolina, they have gone as far as allowing absentee ballots to be submitted via email, right? That's quite fascinating to see that people are actually voting online. But the voter suppression will always exist in especially contested elections. So we are watching very closely what's going to happen in Texas, what's going to happen in Georgia. In terms of voter suppression, one should be able to provide identification to be able to vote. But in some cases, people are unable to vote because either the identification they present is not accepted, or they are not voting into the right precincts because they don't have access to the information of where they vote, especially for elderly voters. But I do believe that this election will have a high voter participation because of what is at stake in the United States, especially for the local dynamics. Americans, U.S. citizens are very concerned with the cost of living, access to jobs, peace and security around the globe, in particular what's happening in Palestine, that many young people, I feel, who have participated in the past year in numerous protests are activated to engage in the political process. It's very close to call who is going to win, but in coming hours or days, we will know who actually won the election. And hopefully, it will be a leader who will push for peace and stability around the world.
Of course, absolutely. Well, we hope to see the day. Thank you so much, Musa Vili, for taking time to speak to us. And thank you so much, Afia, for the update as well.
Thank you.
Let's head to Europe now, where authorities on Tuesday confirmed that at least 6 people have been killed and 23 more wounded after a Russian strike hit an infrastructure facility in the Ukrainian city of Zaporizhia near the front line. The industrial hub had a pre-war population of more than 700,000 people and lies around 35 kilometers from the nearest Russian positions. Ivan Fedorov, the leader of the Zaporizhia region, posted the death toll on social media, and prosecutors said the ballistic missile attack had damaged a civilian infrastructure site. The Ukrainian president's chief of staff, Andriy Yermak, said the Russian strike illustrated that his country needed more support from allies. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez has unveiled details on the billion euros aid package aimed at rebuilding regions and providing relief for families and businesses impacted by the country's worst floods in decades. Now, according to him, financial aid will benefit around 65,000 self-employed workers and around 30,000 companies, mainly small and medium-sized enterprises.
En concreto, el Gobierno de España va a transferir hasta 72.000 euros por casos de incapacidad, entre 20.000 y 60.000 euros para la reparación de las viviendas dañadas y hasta 10.300 euros para cambiar o reparar muebles, electrodomésticos o los enseres que se hayan visto afectados y perdidos. La estimación que hacemos es que con ello vamos a estar beneficiando a 65.000 trabajadores y trabajadoras autónomos y en torno a 30.000 empresas, fundamentalmente pequeña empresa y mediana empresa.
Let's head to Asia now, where a volcano in eastern Indonesia has erupted again on Tuesday, blowing an ash column into the sky a day after it spewed fireballs on nearby villages, killing 9 people. Mount Lewatobi Laki-Laki, a 5,587 feet twin volcano located on the popular tourist island of Flores, shot flaming rocks as residential areas overnight Monday, setting wooden houses on fire and pockmarking the ground. Now, this comes after thousands of people in several villages on Indonesia's popular tourist island of Flores were evacuated on Monday after the volcano's eruption led to the death of 9 people.
Jadi turun kena kaki, batu ada yang turun kena kaki, jadi abu itu panas, kita pun kaki juga melepuh semua, jadi dalam keadaan begitu sudah darah, kepala juga kena dengan batu. Saya sempat tolong ini ada yang korban ini, angkat dia, dicari auto, tapi saya ini sudah darah, macam orang pukul itu, di bawah cari auto. Jadi saya muat dengan istri, anak saya. Antar sampai kantor desa, istri dan anak ikut mobil lain lagi.
In the Middle East, an Israeli attack has targeted an industrial zone and some residential buildings in the town of Qasr in Homs province in central Syria on Tuesday. Now, Syrian state TV quoted the Homs province's health director as saying there were no injuries as a result of the attack. Recall that a previous Israeli attack on Qasr on Thursday wounded a number of civilians and caused material damage. In a statement regarding that incident, Israel's military, which normally does not comment on specific claims of strikes in Syria, claimed to have struck Hezbollah's command centers and weapons storage sites. And that's all on Beyond the Continent. You can watch News Central live on DSTV channel 422, Star Times channel 274, Avo TV, and YouTube. Many thanks for watching. I'm Darshan Usman.